Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the May 8th Wampo, Wichita Area Metropolitan Planning Organization meeting. Call the meeting to order. Welcome. Thanks, Tom, for being here.
You can do it to him for once. Yeah.
Anyway, welcome, everybody. And is anybody filling in or new here that should be introduced? Or are we all kind of regular? Yeah, yes.
I'm filling in for Carl. Linda Ball, City Mayor of Cheney.
Linda, welcome.
I would like to make a comment. I slowed down so that Kelly beat me here, so.
At the park, way over there.
I saw you
somewhere.
walking.
Apparently I'm paying the city, the park over there, but,
We'll try to get you a half off coupon, Kelly. Okay, with that, thanks everybody for being here. And we've called the meeting to order, and everybody had a chance to look at the agenda. And if it's okay, entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So move.
Second.
Thank you, Bert. Dan? Any discussion? Being none, it's been motioned and seconded. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries. Next, we move into the minutes of April 10th meeting. If you had a chance to review the minutes, and any comments or suggestions, and if not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the April 10th meeting.
Move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Ann.
Second.
Thank you. Been motion and a second to approve the minutes. Any other comments? Being none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries. Item C, the director's report.
We distributed copies of the Kansas bike map, and I know Mr. Moriarty was up late last night finishing these. And if you would like to have additional copies, please see Tricia at the end of the table there. She can get you some extra copies. Also, we had a presentation last week by Charles Marone. He's the founder and president of Strong Towns, and if you weren't able to attend that presentation, it was a very good presentation about communities and building strong towns. And we provided a packet of information for you to take with you if you'd like to go through that. And I think that's it.
Okay. Yeah, we had a chance to sit in with Charles Marone, and kind of a unique perspective of how he looks at the value of communities, kind of an eye-opening information that he shares. Okay, with that, we move to the consent agenda. If you printed it out, it's a rather thick document on the consent agenda, but mainly those are all of the contracts and the agreements for the
Motion to
Wampo
approve.
Place. So Tom Jones made a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Thanks, Dan. Any other questions or comments? Being none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to the public comment opportunity, we have a chance, now's the chance for anybody from the public that would like to address the policy body. Please.
Excuse me, I may be out of order, but I'd like to comment on the Maze planning walkable places. Could I do that now, or should I wait?
Well, I think so. We already approved it. I hope it's just a
No,
comment.
it's
Okay.
just a positive comment.
Okay, good. Yeah, why don't you
I-
share with that?
I
Don,
should have done it after you second it, but
it's
you
okay.
have to understand I'm new.
That's all right.
On behalf of the City of Mays, I thank the Wampo staff for supporting the vision of the Planning Walkable Places program. We would have been lost without Teresa Thomas's tireless support and superb organization of our three projects. Also, we'd like to thank TAC for their time spent researching and vetting the program. Last but not least, I want to thank all of you, the Transportation Policy Board members, for voting to fund the Planning Walkable Places program. It is strongly supported by me as it was by Mayor Donnelly, my predecessor, not only for promoting the transportation enhancements, but also for improving the quality of life for the people who call Mays and the entire Wichita region home. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. That was very, very kind. Our compliments to you and your council. Okay, again, public comment. Does anybody want to address the policy body? Please come forward. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Moving on. Planning considerations. What do we have there? Anything? Nothing? Nothing to report on that area. And now new business items. Update on the MTP major decision points. Chris Upchurch, please come to the podium.
Thank you. So, good afternoon. I'm here today to talk to you a bit more about our next update of the Long-Range Metropolitan Transportation Plan. This is our chance to ask what sort of future we want for transportation in our region for the next 20 years. Now, staff have been working on the process we're going to use to update this. And we have a couple of goals in working out that process. A couple I'd like to talk about today are we're looking for the TPB to really have ownership of this plan. We want you to be involved in the decision making, and we want to have buy-in from all of you from the beginning of this process. We also want participation, not only from the TPB, but also from a wide variety of stakeholders and members of the public. And we want this to be open to all of our member jurisdictions, regardless of size, large and small. Everyone has a voice, and we need to hear from everyone in the development of the plan. Now, in order to ensure these, especially those ownership and participation goals, we want to make sure that the TPB is really involved in the consequential, most important decisions about the development of the new plan. On the flip side, we don't want to involve you in the less important decisions. The last thing we want is for action on the MTP, decisions on that to become rote, rubber stamp sort of affairs. I know some of you were involved in the development of Move 2040 last time around, and I came in towards the end of that, and I know it got to be a little bit of a drag towards the end of that 2-year process. So what we'd like to do is have a set of major decision points, points where we have arranged and planned to come to the TPB for action, for decision on your part about some aspect of the plan. And rather than just sort of doing these on the fly as they come up, we wanted to have them at least as much as possible planned out in advance. So today I want to go through what staff are thinking about for these decision points and get your feedback. Are there any important decisions that we're missing that should be on this list? And is there anything on this list that you guys just don't care about, don't want us to bother you with? So the first decision point is going to be the proposed approach, and this is going to be coming up pretty quick, July, probably midsummer of this year. And this will be when we'll ask the policy body to approve the overall approach, including this list of decision points, to approve the creation of a plan advisory committee that will help staff in developing the plan, and the overall schedule and major phases we're going to go through to carry out this planning process.
Chris, can I interrupt just a
Sure.
second? For the new members, this is one of the federal required processes that the MPOs have to go through, where this will be the Move 2045
It's
document.
the successor to Move 2040.
Right. And it's due about
It's due
sometime in
July of 2020, so a little
2020.
over 2 years from now.
So it was kind of painful the last time for those that we were here during that, and it's a massive document, and so this is what we're trying to do is lay out some early signals and plans, and so digest it. And if you have any thoughts or questions, that's what this presentation's about. If I can introduce it a little more for you.
Sure. Yes, we're trying to make it less painful this time around and less massive. So next up is the vision and outcomes, and this is really probably the most important decision point in the whole process. So staff and the TAC will spend the summer and the fall, staff and the PAC, the Plan Advisory Committee, will spend the summer and the fall talking to our various stakeholders, to members of the public, getting input and synthesizing that input into a vision for transportation in our region and a series of outcome statements of what we want to change, to implement in our region as far as transportation goes. These vision and outcomes are what are going to drive the entire rest of the development of the plan. This is where we really set the direction that we want to go. So this is probably the decision point that has the biggest influence over what the final plan is going to look like. And, whoops, wrong way. And we would probably come to you with this around October of this year. Next up, the structure of the Wampo funded project list. One of the decisions we made during the development of our current plan, Move 2040, was we had a specific list of projects that each had specific amounts of Wampo funding attached to them. There are advantages and disadvantages to this approach, and in some of our recent conversations with our federal partners, they've indicated some flexibility in how we structure this. So staff are going to work to come up with a couple of alternatives, and we'd want to bring those back before the policy body. Again, late this fall, probably about November. Now, one of the big challenges in coming up with a 20-year plan is figuring out how much money we are going to have available to spend. So staff will work with our planning partners like KDOT and FHWA and USDOT, and with all of our member jurisdictions to try and come up with some figures, both for the WAMPO funding and for overall transportation spending in the region. And at some point, we're going to ask the policy body to endorse that number. Now, of all the decision points, this is really one that I struggled about whether or not to put this in this list, because you can make the argument that this is purely a technical judgment. It's not really something the policy body needs to have input on. But I ended up including it, at least tentatively, because at some point we may have to say to project sponsor, I'm sorry, we can't put your project in the plan because we don't have enough money. And that statement is going to trace directly back to this decision. So while it's kind of technical, it's also pretty consequential. So that's why it's in here, at least tentatively. This would probably come up towards the end of this year, around December. And since this is one where staff is a little on the fence, this is definitely one we'd like any feedback that you have on. So once we know how much money we have to spend, we have to decide how we want to spend it. That's the place of the investment strategy. And the guiding star, this is really going to be the guiding star for the decisions on what projects we're going to fund. It's how we link the vision and goals, the real big picture stuff, with the actual selection of projects. So it's pretty important. Those of you who are around during Move 2040, you can count up how many times you heard preserve and maintain, our shorthand investment strategy for the current plan. So this will be the equivalent for the next plan. And we'd be doing this early in 2019. Now we finally sort of get down to the nitty-gritty details of the plan, selecting projects, project selection process and criteria. This is also when we would update our performance measures. This is really where we turn those vision and outcomes and investment strategy into something concrete for how we're going to pick projects that'll go into this plan. So this would happen around May of 2019. Now from here, there's kind of a big gap. Our next decision point doesn't come along until a year later, May of 2020. And during that gap, we would be going through the project selection process. We'd be checking off some of the technical boxes that we have to fulfill the federal requirements. We would also be doing a final round of public engagement that would go out and take the draft plan to members of the public, to all of our jurisdictions, and say, this is what we've come out with. What do you have to say to us about it before we do the final approval? And then we would come to you, May of 2020 is the goal, to ask for your final approval. And this is the one decision point that is actually required by federal regulation. So you can't get out of this one. The board does have to say the final yay or nay on the entire plan. So these are the decision points that staff have came up with. I'm happy to answer any questions and eager to hear any feedback that you guys have. Did we get the right things on this list? Is there anything on here that you don't think is really worthy of your time as the policy body?
Chris, I'll comment that, of course, I'm a little more of a paper person, so if you all want to, it's agenda item 5A we're talking about, and it's 2 pages, and it does have those dates and those steps written out, and it might be good to keep in your Wampo file for scheduling. So I can't. I think we've all been through. My personal observations, we've been through in our region kind of some good bumps that are not bad bumps, but progressive bumps and good things happening. And so I'll go back to I'd like to make sure that somehow we have flexibility in this, that we're not stuck with a 25-year plan when something wasn't even in it, or how it can be moved around. And that's,
Yep.
I think we've all kind of experienced that now and seen what to make the region better, for sure. I don't know what step that would be in, but
That would probably be the structure of the project list step is what you're talking about there, in terms of how flexible we want to be, how much of that burden we want to put on the MTP project selection process versus the TIP development process.
right. In the policy body, we could choose to lean to be more rigid and strict with our dates, or we could be flexible.
There's a range of options there that I think staff have been batting around, and we would refine those a bit. And I think there are at least 3 different possibilities we could come to the board with at that point.
I'd like to invite, I was going to say, I'd invite Rick to observe and give us your feedback.
I thought I saw another hand up. Did you have a hand up as well? Okay, sorry. Just a question on the performance measures and target setting. My understanding Wampo already has performance measures and targets, so it just seems a little late in the process, or the existing performance measures and targets, how is that going to fold into, for example, when you're doing the investment strategies or the future funding? So is it actually a little bit earlier than the way it appears in the slide, or?
Sure. Just to give a little more context to that for everyone, we actually have 2 sets of performance measures. We have our local performance measures that were adopted as part of Move 2040. Then we have a federal set of performance measures that come from MAP 21 and the FAST Act that we have to do. We have currently set targets for a majority of our local performance measures and set targets for the federal performance measures that we've been required to so far. We'll be required to set another couple of targets later on in this year. So those are sort of the performance measures that we're using as the inputs to all of this process. We'll use those to create some context as we go out and do all this public engagement, talk to folks when we're trying to get feedback on what people want for the future in of transportation in this region. We'll use those performance measures to say this is the past or the present of transportation in this region, to give them some context. What you see for performance measures on here is if we decide to revisit any of those Wampo performance measures, the performance measures from Move 2040, if those performance measures are based on our goals from the previous plan. So if we've chosen some different goals for the new plan that require different performance measures, or if we just don't think that the performance measures that we've got told us what we wanted to know in terms of developing this plan, maybe we might want to change or refine those to make them more useful for us.
Maybe a fair way to say is they'll be revisited.
Yes. Yeah.
Is it Bart?
Is it fair to assume the work we did on 2040 will just take its life of its own until it's done, and this is going to be a completely separate set of work that replaces it? Because the way you're laying this out, it almost looks like 2040 work was done, and then that's going to run its own course, and we start all over again doing it separately. And I had the same question when you start to set visions, outcomes, all this. This isn't something we take 2040 and we just look at and tweak, we start all over again?
There's a range of approaches you can take to this process. One of them is basically just to stamp, 2020 update on your existing plan and go very much with what we had done as part of Move 2040. The other extreme would be a complete clean sheet design. We totally ignore the 2040 stuff and start from scratch. I think what staff are looking at is somewhere in between those. We'll want to, we'll take the 2040 vision and goals as sort of a starting point when we go out and do all this public engagement and discussion. But just because we already have that, we don't want to be afraid of changing that if we're hearing from different folks that, we think, one example, for instance, is safety. Safety did not get a lot of emphasis in the 2040 plan because at that point, our safety numbers looked pretty good. As I talked to you about several months ago, our safety numbers since then have degraded a bit, and maybe we might want in the new plan to, have a safety goal and more emphasis on that. So it's a chance to go back and revisit what we did in Move 2040. I don't think we're starting from scratch, but I also don't think we're just, doing a cursory update either.
If I could take that a little further, what I'm pushing for is kind of a reimagined Move 2040, using the information that, as we've had, as a basis, but taking into consideration the changes that have taken place, the trends that we're looking at some of the other factors that are kind of pushing it in a different direction, not a totally new direction, but a different direction and focus.
Okay, well, this is first introduction. There's no action required other than, I think staff is taking feedback.
I'm
And,
scribbling frantically here.
right, and you will be, and we'll be bringing this back as an action next Wampo meeting or maybe
No,
in
it would
June?
probably be as part of that proposed approach, which I think I put on there for June or July.
July, okay, all right. If that's comfortable with the policy body, thank you for the information. It's, again, I would encourage us all to kind of keep this as in your schedule, in your Wampo file. So, anything else, Chris?
That's all for this item. I'm still stuck up here for part of the next one too.
You are, okay. If no other comment, then we'll move to item 5B, update the draft benefit cost-effective investment criteria for project selection.
All right.
I
so
think that's a long version of you looking at return on investment. Is that right?
It is. So Phil and I are going to tag team this. I'll start it off here. At last month's policy body meeting, we talked quite a bit about return on investment, and staff were charged by the policy body for doing some more research on this and bringing it back to you this month. So here we are. One of the fruits of that research was that if you look at what other MPOs and state DOTs are doing, you don't see ROI used as much as you do benefit cost analysis or cost benefit analysis, same sort of thing. Cost benefit analysis is a little more common for evaluating transportation projects. It's the same basic idea. You're taking essentially all of the presumed advantages of a project and also tallying up all of the costs, and then you divide the advantages by the costs and get some sort of output. The math is a little different for benefit cost versus ROI, but the bigger difference is that benefit cost analysis usually looks at a somewhat broader range of benefits and costs than ROI does. ROI is a little more economically focused. Benefit cost analysis may cast the net a little more widely. So speaking of that wider net, the first step in benefit cost analysis is you have to decide what sort of benefits you want to consider. And for transportation projects, you often look at things like economic development opportunity, time or gasoline saved from alleviating congestion, look at the safety benefits, environmental benefits. One area where this does get a little tricky is you need to be careful not to double count benefits. For example, if you're looking at both time saved, sort of increased accessibility, and at increases in land value due to a transportation project, there's some overlap there because some of that land value increases because that area is more accessible. So it does get a little tricky making sure you only count each slice of benefit once. Next, we have to convert all of the benefits into dollars. So we're trying to get every benefit converted into dollars here. You have to put dollar values on a human life for the safety stuff. You have to put dollar values on environmental benefits. Everything has to get to dollars. The other aspect here is that often for transportation projects, you have a big lump of capital cost up front, but then the benefits are spread out over many years. You may build this roadway in the first 5 years and then operate it for 40 for the rest of its useful lifetime. So you have to use some sort of discounting to calculate a net present value for all of that benefit. basically because of your inflation rate. You don't want to assume the benefit in the last year is really the same as the benefit in the first year. You also have to do the same thing on the cost side, even though usually a big chunk of the costs for a lot of projects is capital costs up front, then we do have to operate and maintain these facilities, and you want to take that into account as well. So once we've got all these benefits and costs reduced to dollars and put into present day money, then you tally up those benefits and divide them by the costs. And this gets you your benefit cost ratio. Now, hopefully your benefit cost ratio is greater than 1. That probably means it would be worthwhile to do the project. And you can also use this to compare different projects. So if one has a ratio of 1.5 and another has a ratio of 3, well, the one with the ratio of 3 is probably a better deal, so to speak. So we looked at the literature, looked at what's out there. You tend to see benefit cost analysis used a little more commonly at the state DOT level, but there are some MPOs using it. A couple of examples. The Atlanta Regional Commission uses benefit cost analysis in selecting roadway capacity projects for their TIP. Now, they just use it for adding roadway capacity. They don't use it for transit or bike ped, for instance. And that's because they don't feel they have sufficient data to do a benefit cost analysis for every sort of project. The Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which is the San Francisco Bay Area MPO, they did a big benefit cost analysis a couple of years ago, looked at their 100 largest projects, and some of those 100 projects are pretty large, this being the San Francisco Bay Area. And they were pretty ruthless about this. They actually had some projects that were in the TIP only a couple of years from implementation, and they kicked them to the curb because they did not score well on the benefit cost analysis. Another example, the North Central Texas Council of Governments, which is the MPO in Dallas, uses benefit cost analysis. They use it for capacity projects and for air quality projects. Again, just some subsets there. So two sort of common things I'll point out. One is that I don't think I've found any MPO that uses benefit cost analysis for 100% of their project evaluation. You see it used for either certain types of projects or certain size projects. We'll point out the other, these are much larger and better resourced MPOs than Wampo. So that's my section of this. I'll be happy to take any questions before Phil makes it up to the podium here. I'm not.
Good information that did we look at closer regions like Oklahoma City, Tulsa? Does anybody, or
I was
does
not
Mark
able to
use it?
find anything in our region looking for uses of this. All right, I will turn it over to Phil.
As Chris pointed out, we were asked at the last meeting to come back with some ideas or maybe some ways that we could look at using the benefit cost, or what I had called return on investment. And one of the reasons we looked at this was because the uncertainties in federal and state funding levels, and really coming up with a local match with the money that we have available. We looked at land use changes coupled with a slow projected population growth. The community investment plan said that annual growth is about 0.83% per year over the next 25 years. Changing shopping habits. A lot of people are shopping now by online or by phone. Existing tax structures could also see a change in some dramatic ways, especially if brick and mortar buildings start going away for online type venues. You could see changes in property tax. You could see changes in sales tax venues. And just the basic stable revenue sources that cities and counties see. So we see the importance of basing investment in infrastructure and equipment that basically pays a significant rate of regional return that could grow substantially. Some of the policy considerations we've taken into effect, or we're looking at anyway, are the benefit cost could be a dramatic change in the way we're investing. And you may have to make a determination at some point in time due to the way that things are changing and the probabilities of the way things are going, the way the area is projected to grow, are we going to be investing in the same types of facilities and equipment in the future that we're investing in now? When you look at the way freight is going to be increased, we're looking at a 40 to 60% increase in freight movement here. We're looking at maybe at different ways that freight is going to move. Walmart has already ordered 180 Tesla electric trucks. The American Trucker Association is looking at a call for 96,000 new truck drivers per year over the next 20 years, and there's no way that you can get that many truck drivers. So you might be looking at more automated trucks, and therefore the way we're looking at how we're going to handle these could be more automation and more connected types of infrastructure. Some of the draft qualifiers that we've come up with so far, and these are very subject to change based on what your input and your advice would be. Livability factors, environmental factors that take place with how transportation is built and how things are put on the ground. Public health, land and resource use. Are the developments always going to be the same type of single-family developments? Are we going to be looking at more multifamily, mixed use, and infill developments? I know the city of Wichita right now is looking at pretty stringently at some infill type criteria because when you look at the fact that half the households just in Wichita in the near future are going to be sole occupant households, and 88% of households, based on what the Census Bureau is stating, are going to be childless in the next 20 years. Are we going to be building the same types of houses? We're also looking at more walkability and pedestrian-friendly type infrastructure uses. You can see that by the popularity of the Planning Walkable Places program. We're looking at regionally significant factors as well. Mobility, because freight wants to move as fast as it possibly can. Connectivity with the various modes of transportation, bicycles, walking, transit, all of those kinds of things. And the accessibility of getting people where they need to go when they need to be there. We're also looking at regional economic development potential for roadways and how they tie in with land use and development. Are they going to provide short-term employment for construction? Will there be employment or employment shifts due to the different types of housing and land use development? Do they have induced development potential, or will they create the types of development that you're looking for? Will they capture value, or will they, over the course of time, help to pay for themselves? And what kind of short-term and long-term operating and capital expenditures or impacts that could do to your budgets? The benefit and cost effectiveness, again, with factors like travel time benefits, safety is really big. Equity, not doing undue harm to people who cannot afford to have harm done to them. Trends that we've talked about, the household costs. Right now, about 50% of household income goes for housing and transportation costs, business costs, and accessibility costs. We're also used as a draft qualifier, system performance. What kind of conditions will be taking place with the roadways or the land around them? Utility, connectivity, are there utilities in place, or would you have to extend utilities to serve the subdivisions or the new developments? And operational finances, especially to go along with the capital finance costs. Next steps, if you all determine that benefit cost is a valid method of looking at selecting projects, the next steps would be to refine these qualifiers that we've talked about, and then to develop a system of quantifiers that would be used to weight those projects, especially in the selection criteria of projects as we go into the reimagined Move 2040. You have any questions?
Any questions so far? Okay.
one of the things that we want to make absolutely sure with these qualifiers is that cities of all sizes can meet the criteria for qualifying for project funding, and it's not just one size city or very small cities, it's all cities can meet the qualification factors of being able to be funded. That's extremely important to us.
Rick?
Phil, just a quick question. Are other methods for screening projects also being considered, or solely benefit costs for the board?
No, we're looking at other factors as well, but just based on the trends, based on what we see in terms of finances and those kinds of things, we feel like we have to really provide a basis for project selection that's going to give the highest return on investment.
I was just curious what other types you were
So
considering.
we're looking at other selection criteria.
Yeah, I think, Rick, this was a feeling that we introduced this as one more component in the project evaluation. We didn't know if it's going to be valid. I can understand now it's very hard to do a cost benefit evaluation on a bike path or some walkable things, but I can see why some of those other cities have gone towards capacity and accidents, blah, 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 whatever, so. Yeah, Bert.
Phil, just a question. Does this work once done, is this part of what you say your future-looking 2040? Or will we, it seems like in the time I've been on the board, we have had many different runs at how to qualify select projects. And, you know, as you said, somebody was pretty strict and went back to current projects already in the pipeline, applied this process to them and took some out. Has staff had that discussion? Is that kind of the intent of having this apply to current projects in the pipeline to be reevaluated under this, and have that discussion come up again as to whether a project that's being expected to be completed now drop because it doesn't meet this criteria?
No, this would be after what is it, Kristen, 21, 22 projects are already in the TIP pipeline. So it would be after the 22 projects, or 2022 projects.
The thought, I think, we're looking at this as being a selection criteria. Would there ever be a need for the same type of information that is good to have that information as we go through as we look at our own projects and figure out this type of information for our own projects, but it's not a selection criteria, but still required? So go through the process of coming up with the cost benefit analysis, which, as you already alluded to, would be really difficult to put project against project because of this diverse amount of types of projects and sizes, et cetera. So again, I would pose, do we still require it as something that must be done to be a project that's considered, but not have it shift around per se where a project might fall on the list? Because it's exceptional information, I think, to have. And I think that we should have it. But I don't necessarily think it should be something that would knock a project out of a list, just something that would be smart to have. That's my question. Will we have a requirement to come up with something like this, but not actually have it a selection criteria? I think that's for everybody. I don't know if you can answer that now, but.
Right, I think we'll probably, I observe that we might evolve into that answer. We decided to not affect the next year's projects by any of this, and to more consider this for future projects and where it fits, where it ranks on importance, or if it's just other information on the projects. I don't know. I don't have a feeling quite yet on that. But I think adding, when we expanded the TAC and added economists and some other outside parties and business input, I think that's kind of helped drive some of this relook at from the traditional way we were looking at stuff. Does anybody remember
I'm
it differently?
new, so Why do we want the return on investments when our cost benefit or benefit analysis is something that we have used, and it is all, if you go through WSU, of course, you know, it's always going to be updated with our trends, our times and stuff. So I don't understand why we're now bringing that in the picture, but I'm new, so I may not
Well,
have the background I need.
You're using the same words, and I think cost benefit is clearly the right word. It's not really
Okay.
return on investment.
Return on investment is accounting term. Cost benefit is something we get from WSU,
Right,
which has all of the.
Yeah,
Okay.
information, right? And WSU has a member on the TAC committee now.
Okay, so you're
So-
saying the cost benefit is your term, is not now on the projects?
Correct. It's not considered
Okay,
now.
okay.
And we, in the last meeting or two, we're going to maybe try to put it on the first out year.
I
And
was at my first meeting,
Right.
remember, last time?
yes. And thank you for not reviewing the minutes. Yes, David?
Couple comments. First of all, I agree with Phil that we need some kind of flexibility in this. We need an easy way of changing the priorities after they're set because we don't know what the transportation issues are going to be in the future. So if we set something and say this is the way it's going to be, that it may not be the best place to put the funding when it comes time to do that. A couple other things about the ratings that you've got here. First of all, you've got a number of items that you can look at. They may not be a complete list of everything that we need to look at. Things may need to be added and so forth. But we also are going to need weights to each one of these to know how important each one of these items are and to make it a little bit more scientific. There are some items that you've got in here right now that you've got under benefit cost and cost effectiveness, such as challenges for pedestrians and bicycles, challenges for minorities and economically burdened populations, venues for those without access to personal vehicles, land use trends and so forth. I don't know that they belong under benefit cost, maybe more under livability than where you've got them right now. So as you refine this, we need to make sure that we put them in the right categories. We need to put some kind of a weighting to them so that we know exactly how much they're worth, and we need the flexibility to move things as time evolves.
Great observations.
I guess
Good
one
suggestion.
last question, comment. Whatever we do at the end, we all realize that the big elephant in the room is Wichita, okay? If we put something where that we rate it on number of accidents, amount of traffic, all of different things, Wichita is going to outrank everybody else. And I'm not going to end up with anything in Mount Hope and Clearwater and Cheney and so forth. So we've got to have some way of making sure that it's regional and the ratings don't tilt towards one city.
You could just divide Wichita by 10%, so that every project's only worth 10% of whatever.
That sounds like a good idea, but I was on the Kansas State High School Activities Association at one time, and they all decided that Catholic schools had an unfair advantage when it gets into playoffs, and so they wanted to penalize every Catholic school. Well, it's the same thing you're talking about here. I don't think it's a fair way of rating things.
We're in the room, David. We're in the room, you know.
It was in jest.
Yeah. Well, maybe there's a per capita component as well on some things. Yeah. Annie?
Now, coming up with the benefit cost, if we do move forward with that, is that something that Wampo staff would be assisting with for each project, or is that something that the member communities would have to develop themselves under certain guidance?
I think there would probably be some kind of a form to fill out by the communities.
Okay,
Base the benefit cost and come up with the weighting factor, or use the weighting factors for each one that would make a determination on what it is, but
So kind of a combination of the two then?
I would
Okay.
assume, and we obviously lean on WSU as well for the modeling, some of the modeling,
Okay.
because I think we're all pretty comfortable with some of their history with us all, so. Good.
Has the TAC seen this yet, or are we seeing it first and then?
you're seeing it first.
Wh-
You saw it, or the tax saw it. Not
part
the,
of it.
not
Part of
the,
The,
No, we didn't see
this
the chart.
matrix?
We just saw
Okay.
we discussed it.
because I think that would be interesting because of who serves on that. Okay.
Okay, any other, I know out of respect to our federal partners and state partners, any other comments about where we're heading to? Is this consideration agreeable, or at least take some next steps and explore further?
Yes, yes, I would just be curious to know what other methods are being considered, and I know that Phil was starting to touch on that, so, thanks.
Right. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I had my hand up, you didn't
Oh,
see
I'm
it,
sorry
I'm
about
sorry. There's one thing on here that has happened in the last 6 months. The state has issued a freight map, critical freight route map. And we elected not to update our freight map 5 years ago, and I think it's been the same for 7 or 8 years now. And I was wondering if we want to have TAC or a group of people look at that and maybe incorporate the state map. Or maybe staff would do it, I don't know.
Yeah, Chris, looks like Chris may have. Go ahead.
Phil may be about to answer this.
one of the things that, we sent out an RFP that would update the freight plan, and that's one of the facets of the freight plan update.
I wanted to bring it to this board right now. Wichita, nobody's getting any points for freight if you're not on that map, and the map's pretty inconclusive for this area. State's done a good job, and we ought to look at it, so.
Thank you, Tom. So noted.
Actually, Pete, just another follow-up on the benefit cost. We were just talking for a second, Paul and I. From experiences that we have understand from around the country, you quoted, ARC was quoted, MTC. It's fairly pricey, the analysis work to do for roadway capacity. So maybe one of the considerations is, would you want to do such a pricing analysis on only principal arterials and above, or are you looking at all roadways, or kind of get a sense of the benefit cost to the benefit cost? So,
Yeah. Good point.
thought.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. All right. Thank you. Again, this is not a actionable item, so we will move on from there. And we will go to unless there's any other comments, I don't see any hands raised. So we'll go on to the committee and partnership reports and updates. The executive committee did not have an official meeting this past month, so we don't have anything to report. TAC Chair, Mr. Jones?
The only thing that we went over the Amendment 5, made a recommendation on it, and then we had land use trends and freights, just an overview. And then Kristen provided an overview on funding cycle.
Okay.
Covered everything today except for that funding thing.
Very good. And our partners, Mr. Hine, you want to lead off?
Sure, I've got good news.
You do? You cutting a ribbon somewhere?
We should have, but it was not safe because we opened a ramp, and you don't want to be out there for that with a ribbon cutting on a ramp. But southbound I-235 to eastbound US 54, the 2-lane flyover opened, and it is a wonderful drive. You'll have
Wow.
to try it. Yes. Even you East Siders. Because we made things a little harder on the east side with those projects lately because Greenwich is down to 1 lane each direction, and you can't turn left into certain super box stores and things like that. So just stick to the west side. we keep making good progress on the 235 and Kellogg
Like there's an
project.
elephant in the room again.
But, you know, that's the good news on that project. There's
great.
bad news coming. I mean, certainly. We've started work on the northbound single lane flyover to westbound Kellogg. But that won't open till fall, so that's kind of bad news. It's a little slower process, but that southbound one opening was great. So let's focus on that good one. But more bad news on June 11th. We're going to reduce eastbound US 54 through the project to just 2 lanes because we've got to widen a bridge over the big ditch. So that'll be 120 days, 4 months of that. So it'll be morning congestion for those that commute from the west side. And we're rebuilding the westbound US 54 to northbound I-235 ramp. And to do that, they need to close it for 120 days as well on that same start date of June 11. So things get a little messy, and then 4 months later, things get a little better. The end is in sight on this project. It is this time next year.
Good.
Summer of 2019 is the finish date on that interchange project, at least the first phase of it. We have no idea how the other 3 phases will occur or on what timetable. But this phase takes care of a lot of the safety concerns that were a problem at I-235 and US 54. We have a new fact sheet out on the North Junction project, which is coming up someday. So far, we think we will open bids on that next January. Hope that stays on schedule. And that is the first phase of the fix for the North Junction. That is not the actual fix that we're all looking for, but there are some infrastructure improvements that have to be made, especially on the bridges on I-235 that lead up to the North Junction. So that's the first step, and that is progressing. And on the website, wichitakdot.org, we've got a new fact sheet on that if you click long enough, if you look for it. I'll try to put it up at the top of this.
So does that fact sheet, is it different than the?
Not really.
The color?
It's
the one you're
updated.
used
It's got the 4 color phases of the
Okay.
project.
But it's
got
just
some
more current.
updates to it, but it's nothing that you would say, oh,
Okay.
it is updated.
At least some of, we need to throw out the old ones then and start using this for sure.
Yes, this is the new stuff. I told you about East Kellogg. I was going to use the sandwich thing where you start with good news, you go to the bad news, you come back to good news. And my good news was, hey, the Kansas bicycle map's out, but somebody stole my thunder. That is the KDOT report from this side. Thank you.
It's always helpful to hear from you all about that. Mike, is there anything you add to that? Or-
No, I'm not on the agenda this month, so I'm ill prepared. Which is to say, I'm not prepared. It's always a pleasure to be here, though.
And Rick and Paul, anything?
I'm also ill prepared, but I'm going to wing it.
There you go.
First
I
off,
was just at chicken and pickles, so I'm used to winging it.
First off, a lot of new faces on the board. It's been a number of months since I've been able to join you all. I'm one of the 2 USDOT advisory members. Makti Ahmad, who's the regional administrator for Federal Transit's 4 central states, is also one of my colleagues. But it's great to see all of you, and I know there's a lot of new ideas happening, so I look forward to being back more frequently. A number of things have been happening. It's been a busy few months. First off, as Tom was alluding to, it's always good when we have money and we can get things built. So one of the good news items we had was we were finally we've been operating under a series of continuing resolutions federally for quite a while, and now we're fully funded through the end of our fiscal year, actually at monies that were intended for Kansas and the other states. So we're fully funded through September with a slight uptick. So there is some additional money that is coming to Kansas through KDOT, so hopefully that should be some positive benefits. I know that KDOT's especially talked about their funding scenarios for the next few years. So, whenever we can have a fully funded federal program, that obviously helps the state. So good news on that front. Our acting administrator, Brandy Hendrickson, and, again, for some of the new folks in the room, with the change of administration, our previous administrator was from the Northeast, and our administrator now, our acting administrator, is from Indiana, part of the MASTO states. KDOT is one of the states that's part of that. We're real pleased to have Brandy here. She has a strong working knowledge of Kansas issues. She did come out to visit Kansas about in May. She was in Topeka, got to meet with KDOT staff. She spoke at the 100th anniversary of the Kansas Transportation Engineering Conference, got to meet with us. So it's great. I think we'll be seeing more of her out here. I'd love to have her at some point, maybe come down to Wichita. We'll see if there's an opportunity for that. In terms of other things that are happening and moving forward, a big significant development, and this is a compliment to KDOT, is the completion of their initial asset management plan, which was on April 30th. I know that there was a call that they had organized, and Wampo was part of this, where now that this initial plan has been developed, there will be a lot of vetting of that plan. I know Wampo and Mark and the other MPOs will be some of the entities that are looking at the document and talking about it over the next year and a half, but that's significant. So big kudos to KDOT for that. Scenario planning workshop. I'm looking at Chris. I know that our US DOT Volpe Center, we've had a lot of discussions about potentially having a workshop, and so it looks like, I know that they've been canvassing types of example regions, looking at Pete, that might be similar in politics and scope as to what Wichita has. So I think that's winnowing down, and we're getting dates fairly soon. What dates? I think they're coming up.
We're looking at prospective dates, I think 26th and 27th of June. Right now, the folks at the Volpe Center are talking to the potential peers and making sure there's some folks that will be available on those dates, and then we'll be sending out a save the date for all of you who will be invited to that.
The other significant thing I would mention for the regional planning, and this is actually the last one of these workshops that's happening around the country. This started back in MAP 21. There was a whole national discussion of mega regions, which are like, for example, the Northeast Corridor. If you go from DC to Boston, there's these megalopolises of multiple regions that all act as one system. And there was an initiative to look at across the country, where are these mega regions and what issues do they deal with? I mean, for example, in the Northeast or here, our MPOs here may have very similar issues, and we've talked about freight, and in fact, freight is national, freight is international, and it goes across borders. Is freight an issue that would be common? And how do we support the freight industry? How do we support economic development? How do we deal with automated vehicles? There's so many, environmental justice and other issues. So there's been a lot of work going on, and I know that Wampo will be attending. There's going to be a mega regions workshop for the central part of the U.S., which is going to be Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, and Illinois, and that's going to be happening next week at near the offices of Mark. So that's going to be a fairly significant event. I know that KDOT leadership is going to be there as part of the closeout, and MoDOT leadership will be kicking that off. So we're hoping to get a lot of good information, and hopefully that'll be some good sharing as to Wampo as you all commence your next plan development. From our perspective, two significant documents that we've been developing, working to support KDOT actually, is we have completed a 1R, well, in January of last year, we had completed a policy that allowed federal highways to provide funding for resurfacing of roadways. We're in our second year of that, and that program is expanded. We're looking at approximately $80 million. So what that means for Wampo is some of your localities working through KDOT, you might see some of that, it depends. And the other policy we're about to finalize is on bridge preservation. So what we're looking to do and what we're doing is we're participating more with KDOT as it works in terms of providing federal support as we get through some of the funding scenarios and issues and challenges. That's all I have. Any questions?
Rick, thank you, and Tom, it's very helpful to have you guys be here and tell us what's going on the state and federal level. Okay, I didn't mean to set a record for an hour for
I
Wampo.
appreciate that since I'm on the meter.
But we have one. Unfortunately, I need you all for 10 minutes. And we need to have an executive session for, this popped up here.
I make a motion to go into executive session for 10 minutes to discuss matters related to the actions of non-elected WAMPO personnel pursuant to the discussed personnel matters of non-elected personnel justification for executive sessions under Kansas Open Meeting Act, KSA 75-1, and to invite the executive director, Phil Nelson, and WAMPO worker. The open meeting will resume in the Wampo meeting room at, let's see, what time is
At 4:15.
it? At 4:15.
Second.
Okay, it's been a motion and a second to go into executive session. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, motion carries.